And let's go. Seeing lives be changed for the glory of God will never, ever get old to us. And I pray that it never gets old for you. Our vision over the next 2 years is we want every person that breathes air in the town of Nolensville to hear the gospel because of us. But we believe Jesus is too good to keep to ourselves, and we're going to plant churches like this in Smyrna, Murfreesboro, and College Grove. And then together with our other Brentwood campuses over the next 5 years, we want to see 100 healthy congregations across Middle Tennessee, so we see more Joe Brown stories. We believe God is up to something special, and we're so glad that you're here to take part in it. And if you haven't been here the last 2 weeks, we started a series called Marriage Blueprint, and this series has been incredible. So if you missed the first 2 weeks, go and check them out. I want to start this week, week 3, with a quote from an author that I respect called Paul Tripp, and here is his quote about marriage. He says, "If marriage and family are primarily about making life smooth and happy, then God chose a terrible plan. Let's have one messed up sinner with a bunch of issues join another messed up sinner with a bunch of issues, and then into that ball of crazy, let's add other little sinners who will take crazy to new levels," end quote, Paul Tripp. Give it up for my boy Paul. Man, that ain't the Bible, but it sure is true. How many of y'all are married to a big old sinner? Guys, you're so wise. Most of you kept your hands down. Way to go. But marriage is a recipe for conflict. And the reality is we all have conflict, but what we're going to talk about today is healthy conflict. But I don't want us to just have healthy conflict. I want us to pursue Christ-like conflict. Jesus, in his ministry, had a way of confrontation that led to reconciliation. So we want to talk about Christ-like conflict. And the reality is everyone experiences conflict, but not every conflict is Christ-like. So whether you're single, married, single again, part of an extended family, student, child, everyone experiences conflict at home, at work, at school, at church. However, we don't always experience Christ-like conflict. And there's different ways that people approach conflict. So let's talk about some of the ways people approach conflict. Not Christ-like conflict, but conflict. Some people are pacifiers. Some of you are pacifiers in the room, and you want peace and harmony, and that's the goal. And no matter what, no negative vibes, which seems really, really holy and healthy. The problem is, a pacifier will just brush everything under the rug, avoid the issues, and never get to resolution or reconciliation, because by pacifying the situation, you avoid and miss the hard work necessary to create a good and thriving Christ-like relationship. So we don't want to be pacifiers. We also don't want to be pouters. Where's my pouters at? I see one honest person in the room. Thank you, ma'am. Some of us are like Mr. and Mrs. Eeyore. And when you feel hurt, you pout. And you sulk. And you play hide and seek. And you're going to pout and make it tough until the other person realizes you're pouting and does something about it. It ain't going to work. So we don't want to pacify. We don't want to pout. But also, we got stuffers in the room. Listen, conflict is not like tacos. You can't just keep stuffing down conflict and expect to feel good, which perhaps is true also for tacos. I can eat Tums if I eat too many tacos, but if you keep stuffing conflict, the only thing you're going to get is serious heartburn. So we don't want to be a stuffer. And then lastly, we have some people who are lawyers, and you are in it to win it. And the reality is, as a lawyer, this is my default. Man, I can provide, or you can provide yourself with a really great defense when needed, or you can be a phenomenal prosecutor. You're always right, and you're never wrong, and you are a blessing to live with. The reality is, you may have the capacity to win most arguments, but you will lose intimacy in the relationship. In week 1, we said, man, part of our covenant is confrontation and forgiveness. The default here is you try to conquer, and when you conquer, you always divide. So we can't just be lawyers. So today what we want to talk about is Christ-like conflict. So we're going to look at Christ-like conflict. And one of the themes that I'm going to put over this entire sermon today is this. Christ-like conflict means I stay at the table. I stay at the table. Here's why I say that. Because the reality is, families fight. Relationships are hard. Friendships, marriages, they take work. And the Bible actually says it's impossible, but that offenses will come. But Christ-like conflict stays at the table, which means I'm going to pull up a chair, I'm going to sit down, and we're here to work it out. I'm not here to be heard. I'm not here just to air my grievances. I'm not here to yell. I'm going to stay at the table, which means at times it's going to be really, really hard, but I'm going to stay at the table. And if I stay at the table, we will work it out. And the reason why I love the stay at the table language is because this is how I envision like my relationship with Jesus. Listen, if you're like me, you tank it all the time. But Jesus, man, he pulls up a chair right in front of me, knee to knee, eye to eye. He says, let's talk. Let's work through this. Let's get beyond this. Let's get ahead of this. Hey, let's heal from this. Hey, let's offer forgiveness. Hey, let's reconcile. You stay at the table because conflict needs to happen, but you're after reconciliation, forgiveness, and restoration. But most of us, we may sit down, but we get up. We get up from the table. We walk away from the table because most often, the only thing we're concerned about is I and my. What I want and my hopes and my dreams and my desires. Listen, I'm right, and my needs aren't getting met. And I can't be happy unless I have this thing. And I need to be happy, and you aren't making me happy. And so conflict becomes heated and unhealthy, and we don't stay at the table. And sure, the other person I'm sure is wrong. They have their own issues. They have their own sin to deal with. But I get up from the table because I'm not getting what I want. My needs aren't being met. But instead of I and my, the word you need to write down and anchor in today is me. If we're going to stay at the table, work through our issues and conflict, find resolution, not just sweep it under the rug. If we're going to step into Christ-like conflict that actually leads to stronger relationships, then you got to begin with this question. What change does Jesus want to make in me? See, I and my is just where I've been wronged and wounded. And if you don't think you have wronged or wounded others, then you're sorely mistaken. But me is the opposite of I and my, because me is when we begin to look inward. We begin to think, okay, yeah, maybe they're 95% wrong, but what's my 5%? Maybe they're 98, but what's my 2%? Begin with me. Because listen, the reality is, wives are usually eager to honor, submit, and respect their husbands like we talked about last week, when the husband is loving them like Christ loves the church. And husbands are usually very willing to love their wives like Christ loved the church, like we talked about last week, when they're honoring them and submitting to them and serving them. And therein lies the problem. We're always waiting for someone else to make the first move. But I'm going to give you several different Christ-like conflict statements today, and I want you to write them down. And if you're new, normally we'll take one passage of Scripture and just exegete it. But today, we're going to be sort of all over the Scripture, so you might want to go to either Psalms or Proverbs. A lot of them will come from there. But the first thing that I want you to write down is this: Christ-like conflict begins with self-reflection. Psalm 139, verse 23 and 24 says this. It says, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and see if there's any offense in me, and then lead me into the everlasting way." That's what Psalms tells us. Matthew 7, a very famous verse, says, "Hey, first take the beam of wood out of your own eye, and then you can see clearly to take the splinter out of someone else's eye." So it doesn't mean that we don't help them with what's going on with them, but it means we first are self-reflective. We look inward. We let God change us, because then we can actually approach it in a Christ-like way because we've been self-reflective first. So Christ-like confrontation begins with self-reflection. We own our portion of the problem. Sure, the other person is guilty. The other person has their sin to deal with, but you are responsible for you. You're not their Holy Spirit. You are responsible for you. So I'm responsible to the Lord first. So before I enter into Christ-like conflict, I go to the Lord and say, "Oh God, search me. Would you heal me? Would you speak to me? Would you do a work in my heart? Where am I wrong in this?" That's where we begin. And let me just say, if there ever is any sort of abuse that's present of any kind, you need to know there's never an excuse. And most people who are the abuser will make you feel like it's your fault, and it's not. And so if there ever is abuse, then you need to be safe. You need to call someone, call a pastor, call a biblical counselor, call the authorities. There's never an excuse. Amen? But in general, it begins with self-reflection. And we approach conflict by going, "God, what do I own?" And then we enter in by apologizing without qualifications. So do not say this: "I'm sorry," what's the word? Yeah, you ain't apologizing if you do that. "I'm sorry, but you're just crazy," so it's really hard to live with you. Don't do that. No. That's not an apology. A real apology begins this way: "I'm sorry. Will you forgive me?" I'm sorry. Be specific. What are you sorry for? If you can't name it and specific, then you're never going to understand what change needs to happen in you in order to really live differently. And then you ask for forgiveness. It's a picture of humility. And often, if you'll approach it that way, that will diffuse conflict in the beginning, because Christ-like confrontation is quick to forgive. And then you don't just say, "I'm sorry, will you forgive me?" You say, "Hey, I'm sorry, will you forgive me? How can I make it up to you? I want to make this right. I want to do things differently." Because listen, in Christ-like conflict, we demonstrate to others what we believe ourselves about the gospel. The good news of Jesus. We have sinned against our Creator in much larger and more numerous ways than we've ever sinned against one another, and Jesus rushes in to forgive us. And so Christ-like confrontation begins with that willingness to own, admit, forgive, and try to restore. So Christ-like confrontation begins with self-reflection, but also this: Christ-like conflict, man, it overlooks a lot. Proverbs 19:11 says that it is to a man's glory to overlook an offense. To our glory to overlook an offense. Proverbs 12:16 says that the vexation, which is a cool word, the vexation of a fool is known at once, but the wise ignore many insults. So the reason why Christ-like confrontation overlooks a lot is because the Bible says it is foolish to be short-tempered. To feel like you got to comment about everything, say something about everything. You can't let anything go. The Bible says the wise will overlook a lot. One pastor described it this way. I think it was really helpful. He said he thinks about it like a tennis match that he and his wife play, because they like to play tennis. And, a lot of time, man, it's just fun. They're just serving back and forth, and it's fun, and they're having a great time. But then, like, in conflict, all of a sudden, one of them, will just return it with a little bit of a little spice on that ball, And then the other person's like, oh, that's what we're doing now? That's how we're doing it? And then, pow, right back. And then it's, poof, poof. And the next thing you know, you're at the net, whack, 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 whack. He says, that's not a great approach. Christ-like conflict overlooks a lot. So the first person to poof, a little spice on it, just let it go. Pick up another tennis ball, serve it again. Christ-like conflict overlooks a lot. Just let it go. And in the words of the infamous theologian Kenny Rogers, you know him? You got to know when to hold them and know when to... That's right. If you don't know who Kenny Rogers is, just Google him, look him up on Spotify. He's amazing. So it overlooks a lot. But not only does it overlook a lot, Christ-like conflict is gracious and loving. Colossians 4:6 says this. It says, let your speech be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you should answer each person. If you read through the Bible, Jesus had conflict and confrontation with a lot of people and his followers, but he did it in such a way that didn't kill the relationship. So we want to be gracious, and we want to be loving, and we want to give to others what Jesus has given us. When people feel attacked or criticized, most often they will be defensive and shut down, and you cut off communication. But when people feel loved and cared for and value, they will be more open to what you have to say. And this is particularly true in marriage when you live constantly, all the time, with someone who frustrates you constantly and all the time. Don't look at me like you don't get frustrated all the time. So we're gracious and loving. We think carefully. We develop the discipline to say, I'm going to pray before I speak. I'm going to be reflective on this. I'm going to be gracious, I'm going to be loving, and you have a better chance at Christ-like confrontation. Because healthy conflict needs to happen. Conflict needs to happen so there's resolution and reconciliation, but it shouldn't come from a place of rage and anger. So here's a litmus test. When conflict needs to happen, do you get excited about it? When conflict needs to happen, like, ooh, I cannot wait to bring that up. If you do, press pause. Because the reality is, you're probably not going to be gracious or loving, and the other person's probably not going to want to stay at the table. Instead, here's a couple of practical things that I've learned, counselors will tell you. Number one, watch your pronouns. Like, don't say things like, hey, I just want you to know you really hurt me. Instead, say things like, you know what? I was really hurt by that. I was hurt. See the difference? You don't say, you hurt me. Say, man, I felt hurt. Don't say, man, you were just never home anymore. Say, like, you know what? I really want to spend more time with you. Can we talk about our schedules? It's gracious and it's loving. You avoid superlatives like always and never. Those things escalate. You always do this. You never do that. You always do this. You never do that. That is not going to be gracious or loving, and it's not going to help you stay at the table. So Christ-like conflict is gracious and loving. Not only that, Christ-like conflict, man, it's focused. Where's my ADHD people in here? Yeah, I was born in the 70s, grew up in the 80s and 90s. I was the original ADHD kid. Squirrel! And so anytime my wife and I have heated fellowship and we argue, I am like 5 or 6 other steps into the conversation about other things. And we're in a circle, and by the end of the argument, I don't even know what we're arguing about. We're just arguing. You ever feel that way? I don't know where it started, and I'm not sure where it's ending, but man, we have covered a lot of ground. It's focused. Like, Jesus doesn't come to me and go, wait, here's 24 things I'm really frustrated about with you. Jesus comes to me and he says, hey, wait, here's Here's an area I want to see some growth in. Hey, here's an area where I want to see you thrive and flourish. He picks one issue, and he sits down with me, and he deals with that. And I got a lot. But he takes them one at a time. So, man, in your conflict, take one thing at a time. There are other things that need to be discussed, but write them down, save them for later, and stay focused. Sit at the table and deal with this issue. And when you listen, when you're dealing this issue, then Christ-like conflict, and it listens. It listens. For every word you say when you're sitting at the table, you should hear two words. You have one mouth, two ears. James 1:19 and 20 says, be slow to speak, quick to hear, slow to anger. So Christ-like conflict listens. Proverbs 18:13 says, he who gives an answer before he hears, which means you've listened carefully. So he who gives an answer before he listens carefully, Proverbs says, is a fool, and it leads to shame. So one counselor said it this way. He said, most of our communication breakdown and our conflict is not communication problems, it's listening problems. Because for most of us, what we're doing when we sit down at the table is we come over here, and what I want is I want to be understood. I want to be heard, so sit down and listen. But instead, what we do is we seek to understand first before we ask the other person to understand us. We listen. We seek to understand before we seek to be understood. And when you sit at the table, man, don't interrupt. Take turns. If you're not sure, ask a question. If you don't want to know what to do next, ask more questions. But if you'll develop the habit of just listening more than you speak, it'll be amazing how Christ-like the confrontation becomes. Not only do you listen, but Christ-like conflict is wise and patient. Proverbs 12:18 says, there is one whose rash words are like swords that thrust, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. Proverbs 25:11 says, like apples of gold in settings of silver is a word spoken in the right circumstance. So it's wise and patient. So just practically, when you got a grievance, don't do it via text messages or DM or email. And when you get home, we'll talk about this. Don't do that. So number one, it's wise and patient. Face to face. You got to consider the timing. I'll tell you, my wife, Kim, is amazing at understanding a situation and then punting that conversation to either a different time of the day or a better time that week. Maybe it's tired, maybe it's late, maybe she's like, oh, this isn't going to be constructive, and so she'll punt. Sometimes we'll begin a conversation and realize, like, hey, I think we need to put a pin in this where we can really come back and talk about it. And so put a pin. But if you're the one who suggests put a pin in it, then you got to come back to it. Otherwise, it ain't going to make sense later. Like, you're always putting pins and never coming back. But be wise and patient. And I know some of you are like, well, Wade, the Bible says never let the sun go down on your anger. So we're going to have it out. Listen, if that were true, then there are places of Alaska and Sweden that could just argue for 3 months because it never gets dark. So that's not what that verse means. What the verse means is you have Christ-like confrontation, but before that issue takes root in your heart. And then the sun goes down in your heart, and your heart becomes dark towards that. So you deal with it. But sometimes you need a little bit of space. Sometimes you need a mediator. Sometimes you need counseling. Sometimes you need assistance. But it's wise and it's patient. And then the last one, and this one may be the most profound for you. But Christ-like conflict, listen, is filled with gospel hope. gospel hope. Most people say we have irreconcilable differences. But Jesus Christ overcame the greatest irreconcilable difference humanity had with their Creator, and he put it to death. And if Jesus Christ can restore our relationship with Creator God, then he can bring healing and restoration into your life and marriage. And without hope, it's never going to work, because you're going to walk around. It's too far gone. I've messed up. It's too big. It's too far. It's never good. Without hope, it will never work. Because of the cross and the power and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, Jesus can restore anything and everything. And there have been moments in my marriage, I've been honest with you about this, that the only thing that kept us moving forward was the commitment we had and the hope that at one point, at one time, God's going to do something here. Hope carried us through. The grace that we needed was the hope of God. And there's a legendary experiment and a researcher that you can go look up online called Dr. Reicher. And he did this experiment with rats. And just stay with me. What he did is he got a bucket of water. And he would take one rat and he would put it in the bucket of water. And he would time how long it would take for that guy to give up hope and begin to sink. He's like, okay, about 12 to 15 minutes is about all they could last. But as soon as he saw him giving up hope and beginning to go under, he would pick him up. He would take him out. And I imagine him having like a little rat-sized towel. And he would dry him off. He would give him something to eat. He would give him rest, give him a break, and then he'd put him back in the water. And then when they would begin to give up, he'd pick them up. He'd dry them off. He'd give them food. He'd give them rest, and he would put them in. By the end of the experiment, what began with maybe 12 to 15 minutes, the rats could go 60 hours. 100 times more, just because hope was entered into the situation. So psychologists all over the world will use that example of the power of hope. When we're hopeful, when we believe that there is a situation that can be resolved, when hope enters the situation, you can make it. That's not just psychobabble. That's gospel-centered hope. That Jesus, who conquered sin, hell, death, and the grave, and kicked the end out of the borrowed tomb, can do what is necessary in your life. He can do what is necessary in your partner's life. I've seen it in my marriage. I watched my parents go through all sorts of issues. And then when I was in elementary and middle school, get a divorce and walk away. Got up from the table and left. It was really hard years. I watched them just say, nope, it's too hard. But I watched Jesus enter into their lives. Both of them become followers of Jesus. Reconcile about 10 or 12 years later and get remarried to one another. And then spend the next 20 years trying to love each other like they did in the first 25. So I'm not just speaking to you from a theological background. I'm speaking to you from my own marriage, from my own family. You got to have gospel hope. If you're married, God has a plan for your marriage. Even the difficult, tearful, hard moments of it, God has a plan. And Jesus died, was buried, and resurrected to bring hope and healing into your life. And because Jesus died and rose from the grave, anything is possible. So don't lose hope. The only irreconcilable differences were the ones we had with God, and Jesus took care of that. Hope. Hope. It's powerful. So some of you are married, some of you are not. Some of you have been married and remarried again. Welcome home. God's grace is sung about and called amazing because it is. And God has a plan and God has a purpose. And this week, I'm asking you to take one step into Christ-like confrontation. You probably can't do all those things, but you can do one. And as we went through that list today, my assumption is one of them kind of jumped off the screen. Okay, that's where Jesus wants me to start. Jesus doesn't overwhelm you. He embraces you and leads you. The only thing I'm overwhelmed by is His grace. So what I want you to do is I want you to pray with me. I'm going to give you a moment of reflection. The most important voice in this room is not mine, it's God's. So I want you to bow your heads and close your eyes. And in your relationships or in your marriage, where do you need to begin? Self-reflection, overlooking a lot, being gracious and wise, being patient, filled with hope. What's your first step to Christ-like confrontation this week?